Today I'm going to be working on a 2002 MR2 Spyder.
The truth.
Well, I just noticed this when I went to go test drive the car. It looks like my battery charger is not working, so looks like we're going to have to diagnose the alternator. Now, as you can see, our battery voltage is way lower than it should be. It should be about 14 with the car running and about 12 with the car at rest. So being at 11.4 now, it's lower than it should be, which shows me that the alternator is not charging. Now, before we jump to conclusions with the alternator being bad, I'm going to check the fuse. It's up under here. It shows alternator right there, 7.5 amp fuse. So we're going to pull that one and check it, make sure it hasn't blown. Now it's going to be this 7.5 amp fuse right here. Now visually it looks fine, but let's go ahead and get it on our meter and make sure it's good. Alright, our fuse shows that it's good with our meter, so let's go ahead and put it back in the fuse box. And that means it sure enough is our alternator. Now the alternator on these MR2s, especially with the 2ZZ motor, it's tucked way back up in there, so it's a little hard to get to, but it's not impossible. Well, now that we know our alternator's bad, let's go ahead and run down to the store and pick ourselves up a new one. Now that we went and got our new alternator, let's go throw it on the car. I picked up this alternator from my local auto parts store. If you get the same brand as me, this is the part number right here. Now, before I start taking off the belt to get to the alternator and everything, I always like to make a crude drawing of where our belt is actually routed. You can see I got the AC pulley, water pump, there's our alternator, the crank, tensioner pulley, and an idler pulley. If this was on a different 2ZZ car, this would be your power steering pulley. But obviously since I have an MR2, it doesn't have it driven off the crank, so it's just an idler. And because we're working with the electrical side of things, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our negative terminal. Alright, so you can see where my wrench is at. It's a 19mm kind of welded bolt on there. And that's going to be our tensioner pry area. I'm using a double wrench setup, so you're going to pry towards the intake manifold side and the alternator, and it's going to push down on your actual tensioner pulley, which is right there, and then it loosens the belt enough you can slide it off of the alternator. So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, now you can see that our belt is off of our alternator. So we can go ahead and start disconnecting the bolts that hold the alternator on. Alright, if I'm in a situation like this where I can't really see what's going on back there, I always like to compare it to the new one. So how the bolt is set up is this one is the top one, right up there. But it looks like it's got the positive and the negative cables coming off the side over here. And then I've got the one long bolt right down there. So when I'm feeling around, I kind of know where to reach at to feel everything. But I think I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the two cables that I've got feeding in on the back side. Alright, now we got both electrical connections taken off. I'm going to go ahead and start getting those bolts off. Alright, so this top bolt right here is a 12mm, and then down there is a 14. Let's see if I can show you really quick. There it is, right there. Now there's a welded nut on the bottom side of that 14, so you just have to hit it from the front side with a ratchet or maybe an impact gun if you can get it in this area here. But yeah, I'll probably be hitting them both with the ratchet here in just a second. So I actually was able to get my impact on this top one. But the bottom one is pretty difficult to get to with the impact just because of the position that it's in. So I ended up using a ratchet, but I'm leaving the top one in just to kind of help hold the weight of the alternator while I get this bottom one all the way out. It's loose, I'm just getting it by hand right now. But as soon as I get it out, I'll get the top one out, and then I will... Oop, feels like it's going. Nope, it stopped. As soon as I get the bottom one all the way out, I'm going to put a hand on the alternator and then take out the top bolt, and then I should be able to maneuver it up out of this hole where my arm's at right now. There's the bottom bolt. Let's set that aside. You motherfucker. So, I was mistaken. I thought we could get the alternator out of this big gaping hole right here. But it's not wanting to go. So, it looks like my option is going to be probably jacking up the motor just a little bit. Go and removing this nut and this whole bracket, and then dropping this side of the engine down just a bit just to get that alternator up out of there. Alright, to get this motor mount out, looks like there's 4 14mm bolts right there behind the dipstick. So you're just going to have to push the dipstick out of the way a little bit. There's a 14mm right there. There is another 14mm. You can see it right down in there. Kind of, you can sort of see it. And then there's a final one up underneath the wheel well here. Right there. So if you're looking up from the brake caliper, it's right there. And that's also a 14. So before we start taking out all these bolts, I want to go ahead and go underneath the motor itself. I'm going to move that tray, obviously. But I'll get the jack with like a 2x4, just so it disperses the weight of the pressure that jack's going to put on it. And lift it up just a little bit. And then we'll start taking all these bolts off and go from there. Alright, now that we got the engine support out, I can go ahead and get this alternator out. Because I have the 2ZZ in mine, it's got this adapter plate. So you're going to have 4 bolts that bolt into the engine side. These 2 had nuts on the bottom. This one I still have on there. And then these 2 thread straight into the engine block itself. So just be mindful of that. Again, this one came up from the wheel well, and these 2 go down inside the engine bay. Now while you have this off, it's a perfectly good time to go check your belt out, make sure it doesn't have any cracks or anything like that. Mine's only about a year old, so I'm not terribly worried about that, but if yours has been on there for a while, it's probably a good time to change it. Just because this is such a pain in the butt, especially to loosen up that tensioner. If you gotta do this job, you might as well do the belt as well. Alright, here's a quick side-by-side with the 2. Obviously the new one and the old one. The old one, I was looking at it, looks like the original from Toyota. So it's definitely, what, 2002 to now, 14, 15 years old. So definitely time to replace it. Something I want to do though is you can see the pulley size is different. This one's from Monkey Wrench Garage. And this one's obviously the one that comes with the new alternator. So it's a 22mm bolt in the middle of this thing. And I'm going to hit with the impact gun and take both these off and just going to swap the 2. If you're wanting to do this too, or if you're changing out to a larger pulley, I suggest wearing a glove or using a rag to hold onto the actual pulley itself. That way it doesn't cut up your hand if it starts to let loose. If you have a hard time getting this thing off, just gonna give it a couple taps with the hammer. It should free it up enough to pop it right off. Alright, now let's throw our monkey wrench pulley on there. Get our new nut on there. I'd rather use the new nut than the old one. We'll snug it up with the impact here in just a second. course, I see the windings on the inside turning now, so I'm not doing anything by hand. I'm gonna have to hit it with the impact. Just so I can return this one and get my core charge, I'm gonna throw that pulley and this nut on here. I'll slam that in with the impact too. But always double check, get a core charge with these things. If they're typically brand new, it's usually a lot less than a refurbished one. I'm getting $70 US back for this one. So yeah, I definitely want to get this thing back in the box and back to them. The only other thing I've noticed is this wire loom right here. It's got a little 8mm nut on the back holding it on. I'm gonna transfer that over to the new one as well. When I was pulling the alternator out of the car, noticed that there was a wire loom holding it back. I thought it was just gonna be these wires. So that's what I took off earlier, but it was also this wire loom, so I had to pop it with the screwdriver, get that wire loom out, and then the whole alternator could come out. But we're gonna transfer that over to the new one, and then when we put it back in the car, we'll attach the wire loom back in the holder here. Alright, let's get our new alternator into the car. Pretty much the same way we got it out. Just gonna kind of maneuver it down in here. It's really hard to do one-handed, but let's see if I can do it. There we go. Alright, now I'm gonna get the top bolt in first, just so it kind of hangs on something. Then I'll get that bottom bolt started, and then we'll get them both tightened up. Just in case you forgot, the shorter 12mm bolt goes on the top, and the longer 14mm bolt goes on the bottom of the alternator. So I'm gonna get the top one in first, just kind of hang it, and then I'll slide the bottom one in. There we go, I got the top one started. Now to start working on the bottom one, down there. This is where our crude drawing comes in handy. We want to make sure we routed our belt the correct way down here. So I got it all rigged up. I have it loose on the alternator right over here. So when we go ahead and hit our tensioner with some force, I should be able to slip the belt back onto the alternator right down there. Well, that was not fun at all, but I had to end up using a ratchet, which looks like I bent a little bit. Sure as hell did. Bent the head of this thing. But, so I hit it with a ratchet, pushed towards the intake manifold, and then as I was pushing pretty much all the way up to the firewall here, it gave me enough room to slide the belt on. So it's definitely, maybe easier with two people, one person actually just pushing the entire time and the other person trying to slip the belt on, but not impossible with one person. Now on the back side of the alternator, I'm going to go ahead and connect my two electrical connections. The one that goes on the post and the one that just clips right in. Now that we have all of our electrical connections hooked up in the back there, and I hooked the wire back inside the loom clip thing as well, we're going to go ahead and start putting our engine support back over here. Alright, I just got these four tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the ones that go vertically down. You may have to move the engine up or down just a little bit to line them up perfectly. So just kind of be patient with them and try not to strip them out. Alright, so now we got all the bolts in. It took a lot of cursing and swearing to get this thing lined up properly. I ended up having to loosen up this guy up top. And then I was able to pivot this guy around a bit and then go and tighten this guy back up. But it was not fun. I'm going to regret the day that I'm going to have to change out this alternator again. But for now, everything's in place. Everything's all tight. We're going to start up the car and make sure we're getting some voltage. Before you attempt to start it, make sure you plug your battery back in. And tighten this guy up, obviously. There you go, now you can see we're almost getting 14 volts to the battery. That's exactly what we want to see. Alright, let's go ahead and go get that cord charged for this thing. Well, I hope this video helped. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comment section below and I'll try and answer them as soon as I can. If you enjoyed any of the background music that's in any of these videos, check out the artist's SoundCloud. I put a link in the description.